Hi, everyone. Welcome to the second Fast Forward of 2019. Before we begin, as always, I'd like to express our gratitude to the program sponsors, JP Morgan Chase and the Schofield Family Foundation, as well as to Kava for providing today's lunch, which is waiting for you after the show. As many of you know, Halcyon has a great many programs that in various ways support the creativity and innovation that's needed to drive humanity forward. Our unique methodology to do so, and really the meaning of the word Halcyon, is about haven. At the incubator and the arts lab, we provide space for people to take a breath from the challenges, from the speed, from the skepticism of daily life. And a month from now, we unveil our second By the People, which aims to bring that haven to the whole of Washington, D.C., with a free International Arts and Dialogue Festival in every ward of the city. Thank you. Woo! Just wait, there's more. We are back at the Smithsonian Arts and Industries building. We have an art barge floating around the Potomac and Anacostia rivers. And at Union Market, Eaton Hotel, and Mason's Barbershop on H Street, we have a new work by Khalil Joseph, who directed a little video you may have heard of called Lemonade. It's June 15th through the 23rd, and you can register at bythepeople.org or follow us on Instagram at _bythepeople_. We hope today's program, Fast Forward, provides you a little slice of that haven as well. It's a safe space to ask questions, and we hope that you can also take a breath and leave feeling inspired and emboldened. We know that to be true for at least one person. We're happy to have here Chimone D. Chimone, do you want to stand up for a quick second? Who joined us for a similar Fast Forward event last fall with Sally Krawcheck, and left with the most motivation to take the entrepreneurial plunge. So since then, she started her own company, The Stylery, and we are so honored to have you here and excited to know that this program's having a real impact. So congratulations, Chimone. As you likely know by now, Marla Beck is the CEO and co-founder of Bluemercury, an iconic high-growth luxury retail brand, founded in 1999 and acquired in 2015 by Macy's. Bluemercury is widely recognized as a disruptor in the beauty retail industry. The company's exponential growth, currently 184 stores, and I have to ask Marla that number every time I see her because it's always going up, continues to be guided by her leadership, her passion for entrepreneurship, innovation, and consumer brands. Marla is also a cosmetics brand developer, having founded M61 Laboratories and Skincare, as well as Lune & Aster Cosmetics. Today, I'm wearing Lune & Aster Destination Nudes eyeshadow palette and formidable lengthening mascara. She is the first woman to be recognized twice by Inc. magazine, with 2 cover stories focusing on her entrepreneurial achievements. Today, we are so happy to have a woman with an equally impressive resume with us. Jean Case is the chairman of the National Geographic Society and the CEO of the Case Foundation. She is a philanthropist, internet pioneer, impact investor, and much, much more. Her career in the private sector, including as a senior executive at AOL, spanned nearly 2 decades before she left to found the Case Foundation in 1997. Jean currently serves on several boards, as well as National Geographic. She's on Accelerate Brain Cancer Cure and the White House Historical Association, and more. In addition, she found time to write a best-selling book, Be Fearless, 5 Principles for a Life of Breakthroughs and Purpose. I meant to bring my book up. I don't have it. Imagine me holding one right here. It's okay. I'm holding the book right here. Here we go. This one. Other than her advice, Be Fearless captures the wisdom of so many people. I mean, literally everyone is in here. I'm sure many of you saw The Avengers. You know how like every Hollywood actor was in it? That's this book, but for entrepreneurs, presidents, authors, and space archaeologists. It's amazing. And Jean has kindly agreed to sign these after the conversation. In case you don't have your copy yet, we have them for sale in the back of the room. And on that note, please join me in welcoming to the stage Jean and Marla.
Thank you, Jean, for coming. So one thing about the book, Megan, who works with us, went to go find a copy at the store, and they were sold out. So it is a phenomenal book. I highly encourage you to read it. And we're going to talk a little bit about the book today, but more about the concepts behind it and Jean's sort of visionary leadership. So I want to talk about the foundation of the book, which came in 2012 on the 15th anniversary of the Case Foundation.
That's right, yeah.
So talk about the evolution of Be Fearless and where the idea came from.
I sure will, and as I get started, let me just say it's kind of nice to be back home in a way at Halcyon. We've had a long-standing relationship, I feel like partnership with the Case Foundation and Halcyon House. Marla, you and I have been on stages together before. It's so exciting to me. When Marla and I were talking before we took the stage, I said, wait a minute, this could be the other way around today, this interview. So to have a great, fearless role model like yourself to have this conversation with, I'm grateful, so thank you. And thank you, Kate, for those kind words. Okay, so the book. Marla teed it up. But let me go one chapter back before we talk about the work in 2012 that led to the book. So you heard that kind of crazy career trajectory I've had, where I've gone from technology to philanthropy and then into this world of science and exploration with National Geographic. And the result of all of that is that that has taken me not just around the United States to many communities, but literally all over the world, to some of the most remote, hard-to-reach places you would ever go, to tiny little villages, to the biggest cities. And I think what I was really struck by, Steve and I, my husband and I, when we co-founded the Case Foundation, we said our mission would be to invest in people and ideas that can change the world. So that's always what we're looking for, no matter what hat we have on when we're traveling. So as I would go to small villages or big cities or whatever, we're always looking. We have our eye out. We're meeting with people who have ideas. And, too often, even in one-on-one conversations, somebody will say, I have this idea, and it's usually an idea to make, their village, their world better in some way. And I say, that's awesome. What have you done about taking that forward? I don't have what it takes. It's not me. I could never do that. And there's a narrative that plays in their head about all the reasons why it can't be them, right? It takes a special genius. I don't have the right degree. I don't have enough background knowledge, etc. So it became very clear that it wasn't a lack of people with ideas. It was people believing something special was needed to have success if you take an idea forward. So we commissioned some research in 2012 to look at the core qualities of successful entrepreneurs, change makers, and innovators, really seeking, is there something somebody needs to have? And what came out of it were the 5, like there's a book there. There's not a book there. The 5, no, it's fine.
I feel
it's
like
fine. What really came out of it were the 5 principles that form the framework for the book. We say there are 5 principles for a life of breakthroughs and purpose. The book is actually a storytelling book where I use stories to bring the principles alive. But the best news was, okay, these were 5 simple principles that really, I'm not saying they're simple always to apply, but they're simple to understand. And it really turns out just the application of those principles is what causes breakthroughs. The more exciting thing is we could debunk this myth, this narrative of, oh, no, you gotta look like this, you gotta be like that, you have to have this. It turns out it's actually ordinary people who do extraordinary things simply by the application of some of these principles.
Right. The first one is make a big bet. Why is that the first one?
Why do you think it's the first one, Marla? You made a big bet. It's called Bluemercury.
It didn't feel big when I made it. I just sort of did it. And so I'm curious why that's the first one and what's an example of someone in the book?
Well, make a big bet really is the idea that no matter what idea you're taking forward, you're not really starting out trying to find incremental change. And you might not have thought about Bluemercury as a big bet when you got started, because really how big bets happen is small incremental steps at a time. But the difference is you're not aiming for incremental change. You're actually aiming to do something transformative in its own way. And so I highlight a lot of entrepreneurs who've had great success and didn't necessarily know they were making a big bet, and maybe that's how you feel, Marla, when they got started. So for instance, I don't know if you know the story of the Airbnb founders, but sort of their story is they were, recent design school grads who were kind of broke in San Francisco, and they were really thinking, we're not going to make rent this month. What can we do? And so they knew they had one thing, an apartment floor, And so they came up with this idea of renting air mattresses. A design conference was coming to town, and many of their design school colleagues who were coming for the conference said, we can't find hotel rooms anywhere that we can afford in San Francisco. So they bought a couple of air mattresses, and they literally rented them out for $80 each and offered a hot breakfast, and thus was born Airbnb. Now, I don't think those guys said, oh yeah, we're gonna take the global hospitality sector by storm. And indeed, the story, of Airbnb is probably familiar to a lot of you who might have had this happen to you along the way.
Yeah.
Might even be happening to you right now as you're taking your new company forward. Because often, if you see a different future than others, we call that peeking around corners. If you see a different future than others, sometimes that should be, when you're getting this, or good luck with that, that might be really the whisper in your ear that you're really onto something. When we started AOL, 3% of people were online, and they were online 1 hour a week. So can you imagine when we said, no, you need to get on email. Why would I ever need an email account? No, your business needs a website. What would I do with a website?
Right.
Literally, some people don't have the same ability to see a future that often entrepreneurs and change makers can. So that's big bet.
One of my favorite parts of the book is the personal stories you tell too. It's not just about other people, it's about your journey. And one of the key lessons is make failure matter. And I think that was really important because I learned the most from when I fail. Like Bluemercury almost went bankrupt the first 6 months of being in business. So, and you tell some personal stories about failure and some of other people's stories. And I think it's helpful for entrepreneurs and innovators to hear that.
Yeah. So the principle that precedes make failure matter, and they're not in a certain order, but these two really are tied together. And it's be bold, take risks. And when you talk to people about taking risks, I can actually observe body language of discomfort. If I'm talking to a corporate board, if I'm talking to a management team, it doesn't matter. When you bring up taking risks, people get a little uncomfortable because their minds often immediately go to the downside of taking a risk. And I write in the book, and this will come right back to failure, I write in the book about the importance of being diligent and also saying, what's the upside of taking the risk? And by the way, is there a risk in not taking the risk, right? But the real thing that paralyzes people around risk-taking is a fear of failure. But, in many disciplines, we understand the role of R&D. Think about science, think about medicine, think about technology. And in R&D, you're going into trying big things with a clear understanding that they're all probably not going to pan out the way you hope. It's trial and error, right? But what happens is outside those fields, way too often, it's almost like, oh no, nobody fails around here. That doesn't happen. So if you could put a mindset on that this is your R&D, and going in, some things are going to work and some things aren't, it can keep you from being paralyzed by that idea that something's going to fail along the way. If there's almost an expectation that it might, but guess what? The reason R&D is so powerful is because of errors. And as you just said, Marla, what was most important to you was your failure, because it sharpens our focus. It teaches us where we need to pivot or make a difference or refine an idea. Indeed, I actually, as an investor, when I'm looking at investing in an entrepreneur, I'm much more inclined to invest in an entrepreneur that's had a failure or two than someone who's just getting started. Because I know those failures that they've had along the way have made them a much more effective entrepreneur today. So make failure matters. It's a really, really powerful principle, but it really does call on us to do the hard work of understanding it can play a valuable role, and then just really doing the work of saying, all right, I'm gonna chunk my big bet down into incremental steps, so that if I do fail at one of those steps, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. And as you know, there's 2 chapters in there. We think of failure as crash and burn. What if we thought of it as crash and learn? Yeah. And we really used it that way. There's a chapter that says fail in the footsteps of giants, because many successful stories have a path riddled with failure along the way. It's just their biographies got a little sanitized. And I give you credit for talking about your near-death experience in your company, because too often those are swept under the rug and leaders don't talk about those
That's
things.
one thing I admire about you, though, is most public leaders today, and we know many, that won't ever accept that they're wrong or accept failure. And you talk about some of your failures.
I do very, very, very overtly.
It's humanizing. Will you share one?
Sure, I will. And I will also say, you know, I do a lot of work. I'm on a board at Georgetown and spent a year at the business school as executive in residence there. And I think we really do a disservice, particularly to those, you know, as they're starting out in their journeys, to cover up our failures. So, you know, Kate thankfully didn't read a long bio, but often that happens where a long bio will get read and I go like, that's not the way I remember it. And so I read a failure bio. And I talk about how it all sounded so perfect in what they just said. And I literally put up a graphic where, you know, I show the students, this is what you thought my success was like. This is actually what my success looked like. And I did a whole commencement address at George Mason on my failure bio. But I did have a very, very public, probably the most public failure, but it actually played a role, I think, in our decision to go forward, both with that research and then my decision to write a book. So we were undertaking a very large clean water initiative aimed at 10 sub-Saharan African countries. We wanted to do about 1,000 villages with this clean water intervention that seemed just perfect. It was a child's merry-go-round, and as children, you know, played on it, it was like a windmill on its side, and it brought clean water from up in the ground. The tank had billboards around it, so there were advertising opportunities, which was a sustainable business model for keeping it functioning, et cetera. It was a really big bet, and it was a collaborative of many partners. And President Clinton reached out and said, would you be willing to come kind of publicly launch it at the Clinton Global Initiative? And we're like, we don't really like tout things when we're getting started. You know, it's just kind of, we just got to go do it. And please, please, I think we'll get lots more partners. So we agreed. So there I am launching it with President Clinton to my right, First Lady Laura Bush to my left. Like, this is a big profile thing. All right, so we set out, and we had partners on the ground in Africa. The factory was in Africa. It had been a proven intervention for some number of years. So it wasn't like a startup in the sense that we weren't going through R&D things in the technology itself. But as we went forward and had all those villages and all those countries and different teams, it was not reaching the quality standard or the scale that all of us had really hoped, and certainly not on the timeline that we needed in order for the business model to work out. So we did what everybody would do. We came back and, you know, we looked at where there were failures and we course corrected and we tried to get it right. We changed out some teams, we made some adjustments here and there, et cetera. Well, it still wasn't working. And we were a few years in at this point. So we probably had hundreds and hundreds of villages using it, but not on the track we wanted to be on. So I chaired the board, and at the Case Foundation, some of you have been there, it's all glass walls. And so our board meeting takes place behind glass walls. And it was a stressful board meeting in which we had to basically deal with the fact that this was failing and what were we going to do about it. And so, you know, we were trying to be curious. So this is really bad right now, like, you know, really trying not to show the extreme sort of stress we were all feeling. But anyway, you know, I think what we all wanted to do was, could we just shut it down and sweep it under the rug and hope nobody asks about it? But we knew we couldn't do that. So we made a very fearless decision to come clean. And when I say fearless, not because there wasn't fear, but because we looked at the fear and we said we got to push past it. And I wrote a blog called The Painful Acknowledgement of Coming Up Short. And boy, was it. And we told the world, like, it's not working. We're pivoting away from this, and, you know, here's what we learned in the process, and we will share our learnings with anyone that wants to know. Well, you know, when I was going to hit that send button, I truly remember my finger kind of going, I don't have to, you know, I don't want to hit that send button, but I hit it. And then I waited, and I thought, you know, it could crater our reputation as Case Foundation. Would I ever be able to build a big collaborative again, because this one had failed? Really, it was so powerful. Almost immediately, people reached out from different sectors, but particularly from nonprofits and philanthropies, to say, thank you for writing that. When we're all out taking on big, daunting challenges, It's not always going to work out 100% of the time, but nobody talks about failure. And we can't get better unless we talk about failure and share. So we started doing these fail fests, and we would call them liquid fail fests. And they weren't celebrations of failure, but they were moments where we asked people to share their failures. Beer and wine helped a lot, let me just say.
Yeah.
But it really became transformational, Marla, because partners came together and shared things they had learned, which we could then be a little further down the line on stuff we were doing. And it became very clear that this idea of acknowledging failure, doing the hard work of knowing the lessons, and then sharing them could be really powerful.
Right, no, very important. I love one of your conversations, or one of the entrepreneurs you talk about, Jordan.
Oh yeah,
she's
Jordan Shara.
Yeah, she's young. I can't remember if that was Reach Beyond Your Bubble. It seems like it should have been.
Well, yeah, it was actually, it probably was a lot of things.
Lesson
so
4.
what Marla is referencing is we did a campaign some number of years ago called Finding Fearless. And we went out there and we asked people, give us your fearless stories. And again, I want to say, fearlessness is not the lack of fear. It's the ability to look fear in the eye and push past it. And particularly for the entrepreneurs in the audience, you do that every day, right? It's not like it ever stops getting scary, or you go, cha-ching,
Just
I'm
making
done.
a phone call, right?
Yes.
Can be scary.
Still,
Yeah.
right? I think we all think we graduate out of that, but I am telling you, not only on this tour, not only since the book, but since our Be Fearless work started, people in the highest places, in the most prominent positions, with the most degree of success have fear. Yeah. So there isn't really lack of fear. Okay, so Jordan, let's go back to Finding Fearless. So we said, bring us the fearless stories you know. This 14-year-old girl says she had a real concern about the number of prescription drugs that were finding their way onto the streets in Madison, Wisconsin. And she wanted to do something about it. It's a bit of a longer story, but essentially she asked her community if she could work with them in writing a grant. She found out there was a federal grant available for programs that do this. And they said they would, and she said, but will you share it with the broader community, not just a narrow neighborhood? And they said, no, we won't. So she went to the next community and asked them if they would do that, and they said, no, we won't. So she applied for the grant and won it, and then shared it with all the communities. Fast forward the tape, today Jordan is, I think she's a college senior now, and she's taken 1.5 million pounds of illegal drugs off the streets.
Amazing.
And she started out as a 14-year-old. And I think that's such an important lesson for all of us, because one of the themes in the book, and going back to that narrative that can play in our heads, which is really unhelpful, one of the themes in the book, I try to talk about Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, who says it was such an advantage when she started Spanx that she didn't know anything about the fashion business. That was actually an advantage. Airbnb said one of our strategic advantages was precisely how little we knew about the hospitality industry. Because going back to what I said earlier, for you to see a different future, it often doesn't come from those steeped in this is how it's done. It comes from people coming to something fresh. You heard I'm on all these brain boards. I've been on like 3 or 4 brain science boards. I don't have a college degree, okay? But my value at that table is I can ask questions others can't, because they're so knowledgeable and steeped, which is another story I tell in the book about Jill Andrews. So we did something with the federal government, and I think this is a great example of both Reach Beyond Your Bubble, which is bring in people who aren't all the same. So if I'm at a brain table, I'm not all the same. I'm odd man out, but I've learned I can be the special sauce, or complete the sauce is maybe a better way to put it. And they can certainly, teach me things. So we did some trainings with the federal government around contests and grand challenges and their role in building innovation. And there it's, throwing big challenges out there, I think you all know what these are, and inviting the public to come in and be part of the solution. Well, the Ebola suit, when the Ebola crisis was really at its head, was a real problem. It had a number of vulnerabilities, like 22 of them on the suit. It took like an hour to suit it up. It took even longer to get it out. It was just not working in the field. So USAID did a contest and grand challenge as part of our work with them to come up with a new design for the Ebola suit. And so these teams met all over the United States. The one in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, remember, these are like mostly brainiacs sitting around a table, really steeped in understanding. both the Ebola virus and all the things it takes to deliver on the front lines out there. But a wedding dress designer by the name of Jill Andrews said, I want to be on a team. So she was assigned to the team at Johns Hopkins, and their design won. And when they won, to a person, everyone on that team said, we would never have won were it not for Jill Andrews, because Jill was in the business, she says, if you can build a bra, you can build a bridge. So, what she knew was the mechanics of outfits, how to get in them, how to get out of them, how to make them functional in different environments, etc. And so it's just a reminder to all of us. We have a lot of women in the audience this morning, and I know a lot of this is about women entrepreneurs. I think, and Marla and I were talking, we are still in environments, whether they be boards or rooms, where we're still the only women. It's 2019. So now imagine you haven't built up a resume or a portfolio yet, or people don't understand that maybe you have skills because they're not yet known. I just can't emphasize enough, if you think of yourself as maybe you will be the secret sauce, just like Jill Andrews was. That team would not have been as strong without that one true outlier at the table, and that's reach beyond your bubble. Yeah. It is recognizing that we need to build tables that are diverse, and there's compelling, overwhelming data from McKinsey, from Deloitte, from Boston Consulting Group today that says teams that are female-led or have diverse teams outperformed their counterparts, not just financially, but open to change, more innovative. So this idea that you can be the special sauce, really own that. That's what the data is teaching us today.
Sticking on women's leadership for a minute, I had the good fortune of being on a panel after you a couple of years ago at a Harvard Business School event. And Jean actually interviewed Barbara Hackman Franklin and told her story of how she fundamentally changed the federal government and women's roles in federal government. Can you talk to us about Barbara? She's mentioned in the book. I was so excited when I read the book to hear her story again in more detail.
Because we were together that night.
Yeah,
that was so fun. As Marla said, she was in the first class at HBS that had women. But President Nixon had just been elected to office, and he gave his first press conference. And the female, White House correspondents were rare then. But one of the females in the audience stood up and said, President Nixon, you've made about 1,000 appointments so far, and only a few of them are women. Are you intending to hold back our sex and not give us the same opportunities as men? And he was like, okay. And he said, well, actually, I was completely unaware of that, and I shall make sure we do something about it. So they found Barbara, and she was at Citibank at the time, an executive at Citibank, young, and they brought her to the White House with a specific mandate to build up the ranks of women in appointed roles. Before she was done, over 1,000 women were given appointments in the Nixon administration. And the next year or two, President Nixon was on the cover of Newsweek. You can Google it. And it says, and the headline was, perhaps the person who's done more for women than anyone else is Richard Nixon. And the cool thing about the 1,000, we were talking about this, right, Marla?
Yeah.
The cool thing about the 1,000 is that some of those women went on to unbelievable, remarkable roles in the Senate, out in the States. I'm reading Sandra Day O'Connor's biography first. She talks about Barbara and says Barbara tried to convince President Nixon to nominate her for the Supreme Court, or a judge. I don't think it was Supreme Court. I think it was like for an appellate court. Then, that early, she wasn't nominated for Supreme Court justice until President Reagan. So the tentacles of one woman going in, using her voice, using her platform to say, how do we make more happen, really has changed history for all time in terms of the number of women serving.
What I also love about that story is how the reporter, with one sentence, started the change.
Yes.
And we have a lot of young people in the audience and people in their careers, and they may think, or people who are just busy with their lives who may think, how can I make a difference? I'm too busy, right?
Right.
So what advice would you have for them to make a difference, to be fearless?
Yeah. Well, no matter where you are on your journey or what sector you're in, or like big companies starting a company line, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
if you really have priorities, if you have something that's really speaking to you, and we should probably talk about let urgency conquer fear, but many of us today see a world that's very divided. By the way, not just here in the United States, but of course around the world. We see a lot of challenges that seem new. I mean, some of these things we've lived through in history before, but for us, and it is creating in many people a sense of agitation, frustration, sometimes anger. The last principle is called let urgency conquer fear. Martin Luther King called it the fierce urgency of now. So it turns out most people have something that they see as they go about their daily lives, and they say, we need to do something about that. But they either don't believe they have time to take that on, or, like I said earlier, they don't think they can be the one. Well, I've tried to speak to why they can be the one. Now let's talk about the time. The bottom line is, if something is important to you, whether it's a priority at work, whether you're thinking about taking an idea forward, but you're frozen by where to get started, you start right where you are with the next thing by literally putting it on your calendar. I mean, we actually do have more time than we realize. What we often don't do, though, is commit the time, calendarize it, just like it's as important as anything else that would. If you'd put a doctor's appointment on your calendar, why wouldn't you put an hour of making phone calls or sending an email to advance your idea or to take you to the next level? And it's such a simple thing. I'm often stunned by how people think they don't have time, but as soon as they're very intentional and saying, what time do I need? And sometimes it can be 15 minutes today, right?
Right.
But my advice would be start right where you are. That's the first chapter of the book. Think about even the incremental steps you could do today to take something you care about forward in your job, in your neighborhood, like, whatever it is, and just commit to putting it on the calendar and giving yourself that time. Can you do one thing today? Can you do one thing this week? Can you do one thing this month? Chances are you can.
Yeah. I'd like to talk about movements now, and two movements you're really embedded in. One is impact investing, and one is inclusive entrepreneurship. And I know you mentioned Marshall Gans and the theory of movements. Can you talk about your activity in creating these movements, but also influencing them, and maybe explain a little bit about the theory of movements?
Sure. Well, I am aware I'm in Halcyon House, so these are not new topics to Halcyon House, obviously. But I see them as almost concentric circles. So impact investing, of course, is this movement that recognizes truly the power of capital as a tool to change the world. These are new generation entrepreneurs. Some are with us today. A new class of investors coming alongside of them that say, yes, we want a financial return. We don't want to compromise a financial return in many cases. But we think capital can do more and maybe even create a social return. So this new generation of companies that are coming out, you think of a Warby Parker, for instance. Warby just announced last month that its buy a pair, give a pair has now enabled 5 million people around the world to have a pair of eyeglasses who otherwise wouldn't, simply because you choose to buy that brand. That is real impact. That's measurable, that's intention, that's really changing the world. So we're super jazzed, and if you're not following the numbers on it, the movement really is, I think, heading toward the mainstream. We could have a debate about how far we are from the mainstream, but for the last few years, assets under management and impact investing have doubled each year. And the exciting thing is in 2018, they went to $502 billion, which means if the trend even comes close to continuing, we're quickly going to top a trillion. And when you're $1 trillion, you're not really seen as this nascent, thing anymore. And so I think that's really exciting news. But let me talk about the inclusive thing, because they're really, really tied together. It's one of the reasons I love Halcyon so much. Today the data, going back to data, last year, 2% of capital went to startups led by women. 2%. It's 2019. 98% of the capital went to male-led startups. Do you remember the data I just gave you that McKinsey and Boston Consulting Group and Deloitte? So wait, they outperform, but still only 2% of capital is going there? So it's kind of a little bit of a dire picture. For African Americans, it's less than 1% of the capital that went. And then even geographically, we're not diversified enough. Nearly 80% of the capital went to just 3 places: California, New York, and Massachusetts. So I just spent last week looking at the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Florida with my husband's Rise of the Rest tour that goes across the country and looks at non-obvious places. Florida's the third largest state. It got less than 2% of venture capital last year. So we have a very unique situation. The state of startups is down. It is a 40-year low. Startups are our economic engine. That is what has created this great nation we love. And all net new jobs come from high-growth startups, not from big companies. So we should all be really concerned that the number of startups are down. All the more reason we need all the players and all the ideas on the field. And we can't suddenly say, no, you got to be a white male before we're taking your idea forward. We really need everyone out there bringing their ideas, getting mentored, getting capital, and really taking forward. And the other thing, everywhere I go, and Halcyon's a great example of this, if people come from non-obvious, or let's say not the sort of traditional VC kind of background, they've lived different problems, okay? Like for me, I was the youngest being raised by a single mom. We had 4 kids in the house. I can see things today I would not have been able to see if I had been raised differently. And at the end of the day, entrepreneurs and change makers solve problems. So if they've lived different problems, they're going to find different innovations. And it just turns out that many of the elites in Silicon Valley, where about 50% of capital is going, haven't lived different kind of problems. And therefore, as we think about some of the innovations, they're really going to people who already have plenty of innovation in their life, plenty of convenience and control. And so it really is a clarion call specifically to those who are a little bit different than those who've brought companies forward before, to get in the game and let us help you find champions and support and mentorship and capital, because I think it will really transform and better secure our economy. To me, it's an innovation imperative.
You've had so much amazing success in your life, and you're so good at giving back. Can you talk to us a little bit about the journey and who were champions and mentors to you? We talk a lot about that here. How do you find a mentor? How do you find a champion? What does that look like? And what's been your experience?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate. I mentioned that I was raised by a single mom, but I had the really good fortune of getting a full scholarship at the local private school. And when I was young, I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and my school was really encouraging that. I didn't actually know any lawyers. And my dad had been a long-haul trucker. My mom was a waitress. We didn't really have anyone in our family who'd ever gone to college. I'd never been in a professional office. So when I'm in high school, they enable me to have this internship with the town judge who became mayor during the time of my internship with him. And when I went in there, it was truly the first professional environment I'd ever been in, where I saw people working in suits. The only place I'd ever seen suits really was in church. And so, you know, it was beyond eye-opening. It was as though someone unlocked a world that really probably would have otherwise never been available for me to come in and play a role in. So, you know, I fell in love and just saw, like, you know, the potential, and saw my own future differently because of that opportunity. So he went on to be elected to Congress. I worked for him when he became a congressman when I was got out of high school, and I went to college by night. And then in the midst of that, got an opportunity to come with President Reagan. I got a political appointment with President Reagan here in Washington. And you heard me say I don't have a college degree. I thought when I came to work for President Reagan, I would continue going to school at night and finish my degree. But my career really took off from that point. And I kept thinking, I'm going to go back. And I'm 59 years old, and I haven't gone back yet. And I may still. We'll see.
Right. No, it's clear that you don't need a college degree to have huge success.
Today, I think you do, though. Like, I think about young people who would have a similar experience to me. It would be so much harder today, people, you know, taking a risk on someone without that degree. So again, I just feel, you know, the timing and the time, I was very fortunate.
I want to open it up to Q&A in a little bit, so keep your questions in mind. I want to get to know a little bit more about you. So what shows do you watch, or what podcasts are your favorite? I know that you have your own Facebook Fearless podcast, which is amazing. But
Thank you.
talk to us about sort of what you do. You talked about reading biographies. What do you do for inspiration? You're so
I read a lot of
inspiring.
books,
Yeah.
and I probably reference, I don't know, we never counted.
I know. I was trying
Dozens
to
of
count.
books.
I was highlighting the books to go read
Yeah.
them. Yeah.
No, I read books. At the Case Foundation, we read books together when they're really powerful. Probably our most sort of powerful and influential book that we've read together, and then we do wine and cheese and we talk about it. And we don't do this all the time. We do it routinely if there's a really amazing book. Is a book called How We Got to Now by Stephen Johnson. Some of you may know Stephen Johnson's work around innovation. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to check it out. It is really quite a remarkable book. But I mostly read. However, remember I'm chairman of the National Geographic Society. So what do? I watch a National Geographic channel. And you know, it's so exciting. It's such an exciting time at National Geographic because you know, we've just won an Oscar for our new documentary, Free Solo. And if you haven't seen it, I want to encourage you to go see it.
Yeah.
And last month we announced we're the first brand in the world to have passed 100 million Instagram users.
Wow.
So really cool stuff. So between, you know, the Case Foundation, National Geographic, and other crazy things I'm doing, I actually don't watch a lot of things, but I read and I listen to podcasts. I do, yeah.
Right now, there's this incredible opportunity and urgency for people to be fearless, to take the lessons of your book to heart. If you had to point out a couple of areas for people to think about to be fearless, and what would that be?
Well, and to follow up on what you just said, I had the true blessing of Jane Goodall writing the foreword for my book.
Yes.
Talk about an icon of fearlessness. And in her foreword, she really puts out a call and says there's never been a more important time in history to be fearless than right now. So that's not me, that's Jane Goodall telling you guys, okay?
And you.
So, you know, what I would say, I want to go back to what I said about that fierce urgency of now. You know, if you're not already taking a bet forward, if you're not already finding a way where you really sort of are satisfying something calling to you by playing some role. And by the way, the role you can play can really range. I mean, my mom sometimes routinely worked double shifts as a waitress. When I said everybody has time, look, the reality is everybody's at a different place. You know, if you're studying for finals this week or something, you know, you don't have, but I'm just saying generally, we can do so much more than we think we can. And listen to that voice, and listen, and if you don't have something which I call the true north, and I write about it in my book, for me, I wanted to spend my career empowering others. I knew that's what I wanted to do. I had been given this remarkable opportunity of someone coming from the working class to go into this other class, which then set me up for success. And I never wanted to, like, you know, turn my back on that. Because others cared about empowering me, I wanted to sort of pay it forward and use my time and talents doing that. I feel like I've had the privilege to do that. But what's your true north? What bugs you? What calls to you? And if you're not doing something about it today, you know, literally, just like I said, put things on a calendar, I would encourage you to journal about it, literally make a list, put some things down that are things to do to just get started. And the start rate where you are, it really just says, whoever you are, whatever you have something to get started with.
No, I think that's a perfect place to open it up. I mean, you're so inspirational to all of us, but I also love your humility and, you know, talking about your failure, but also you and Steve will go in an RV and go see what's going on. And I really admire so much about what you stand for.
Thank you.
How about some questions?
We'd love that. Oh, good. I usually have to say who's going to ask the first fearless question. Look at that. We got hands.
No issues with our crowd.
I think she's coming.
Use my voice. You talked about the urgency of now, and I think that the context you were setting was really more about what an individual's sense of urgency is. I think there is a global or wide sense that climate change and sustainability requires an urgency of now amongst everyone.
Yes.
And that it is at a crisis that most people either can't see or don't acknowledge or are overwhelmed by. And what I've been thinking a lot about is both urgency and agency. And I'd really like to hear about your thoughts about more of a societal or global addressing of that challenge.
Well, obviously, we're all over this in National Geographic, as you might imagine. And indeed, this week, I will publish a piece. I just am fresh back from Hawaii, and when I was at Pearl Harbor, I went to NOAA, which is, the National Organization for Ocean and Atmospheric Administration. So they have the lead on the plastics problem right now. And, plastics is climate, plastics is, all kinds of things, environment. But I went into the labs, and I write about this in what I'm publishing this coming week, and they had test tubes about this big. And they invited me in to look at the work that they were doing. And the microplastics now are at such a small level that they've been found in embryonic fish. There was a blue marlin that was this big, and I'll publish the picture of inside the test tube. It looks exactly like a blue marlin, the big blue marlin. It's like this big. When they, dissected it, plastic. So if the first food a young fish gets is a piece of plastic, it's toast.
But everybody enjoy your lunch in disposable containers.
What's that?
I said, but we should all enjoy our lunch in disposable containers.
Yeah, well, I just, I think that it's something that we can all play a role in, and I want to tie it back to, like, what can we do and what can, we at National Geographic try to publish true how-tos, like simple steps any person can take. We decided to ban plastic water bottles at the Case Foundation. I don't know, I think we discovered it was, how many years ago, Sam? 5 years ago? And we know that that's tens of thousands of plastic water bottles that we took out, okay, like we didn't use. The power of one company, our new partner at National Geographic is Disney, and in the spirit of our partnership, the CEO made a decision to take plastic straws out of the parks, and that's hundreds and hundreds of millions of plastic straws now that won't find their way into rivers, that won't find their ways into ocean, because one company did one thing. Disney also has decided, while it allows plastic water bottles, it recycles them and breaks them down and creates uniforms for their workers and t-shirts that they sell saying this came from a plastic water bottle. So I think intentionality, if you want to play a role, and I'll give you a funny thing that happened just this week that is such a citizen thing. I was walking along the river here and could not believe the trash. I mean, we're right at the river's edge, okay, the river walk. The trash was overflowing from the garbage cans, and now it was all over. It was a windy day. And of course, a lot of that trash was plastic, which means it's going to lift up, go in the river, It's going to end up in our oceans. We know what's going to happen. So I tweeted it out, and I'm like, this is distressing to see. It's a windy day, and that plastic's going to find its way into the river and eventually the ocean. It was kind of a fun thing because the National Park Service got back and said, okay, Jean, we heard you, we cleaned it up, here it is.
That's great.
So, it really is an example. And had I had a means at that point to do something about it myself, I would have, but I didn't have any containers with me or whatever. So it's just all over the place what we can do. When we want to play a role, we can play a role.
It's a great example of start from where you are.
Right.
Right. Great. Other questions?
Hi. Thank you so much for your work on the plastics issue in addition to everything else you're working on. I'm looking for advice on how to respond when people tell you, it's kind of an age-old issue for women, you do too much. You're trying to do too much. So if you have more than one entrepreneurial idea, or you're also working on a book, or all these other things that I'm sure you might not have as many questions directed to you about you're doing too much, but
I do.
for those,
routinely.
you do? You still do? Okay. Ooh, then I really want to hear. So, I often don't hear this, sorry to the men in the room, but I don't hear men and male entrepreneurs and writers and doers being questioned in the same way, that they need to focus on one thing.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear how you respond and react.
I think a full, rich life, and I think it's actually maybe even more important early in life, where you take on a lot of things and you begin to then understand where the path might be leading you, right? What I get most concerned about with students particularly is if they're too myopic in what they think they want to do and they haven't opened their aperture enough to understand, there might be 5 or 10 other things they should be considering. But I will say, I think what's behind that a little bit is as women, we have tremendous unpaid labor hours that our male counterparts don't have. And that's just the way we've come to today in society without blaming anyone. And so before we even get started doing work, we already have a lot of work that our day holds. And so I think some of that, comes from that. But the other thing I want to say is, I encourage doing a lot, and the reason some women don't feel comfortable doing more is because as women, I think we have a little more tendency to be perfectionists. Not all women. I'm just saying in our gender, I think we hold ourselves to a really high standard. And I write about this in the book, and I would just encourage any woman in the room today, any person who feels like you're not in the mainstream when you sit at a table, you can't carry that because that will limit you in life. If you say, so when I'm chairing something, I don't want to feel like, well, crud, if I screw up, I've let my gender down, okay? I just need to be me, doing the best job I can at that moment and not carry the weight of people without college degrees, kids raised by single moms, being a woman. Like, that is just not helpful. And it's tied a little bit to this perfectionist thing. And I had this brother-in-law who died of brain cancer 20 years ago, who was this brilliant young man, Rhodes Scholar, youngest CEO ever to run an investment banking firm, et cetera, but a wonderful human being. And, his wife asked him one day when she went into the office, how do you do it all? Like, how do you just do it all? And he said, the 80% rule. And she said, what's that? And he said, I don't try to do it all 100%. If I get it 80% right, that's good enough. And I don't think that comes as naturally to women to think that way. And I remember when I heard that, I thought, I need to do more of that because I tend to get caught up in it. If I can't do it perfectly, if I can't be at every single thing, I can't take this on. So keep doing it all. That's what I would say. But also check yourself and make sure that you're not running yourself into the ground because of those additional responsibilities that we often don't think about when we think about all the things we have to do.
Great advice. Yeah. Let's get the microphone. So I'm sure you have a great voice. I want to make sure we all hear.
So it's fine. I'd like to circle back a little bit to sort of a question you touched on about mentorship, because I find there's I'm probably maybe in a different era as some of the people in the audience, but what I find is that you reach a certain level of success, and so you are successful, and you are of a certain age, over a certain age, and somehow people seem to think that you no longer require mentorship, and that finding mentors when you're at that level becomes very challenging. So I'm just a couple years younger, and not the same level of success, but I think I've done well. And how do you find that next level of mentor in having them open up and realize that there's still more down the road to go?
Well, I think I'm a lifelong learner. And so in any environment I'm in, I'm trying to learn. So I don't think you have to have the official title of mentor to be mentoring someone. And I often find I'm mentored in many environments by people younger than I am, by people less experienced than I am. I have always had a cohort of mentees, often young women, but not always. And I'm always stunned. It's like, I'm like, who's mentoring whom here? I mean, it's like, I'm learning from them, they're learning from me. That reach beyond your bubble is really what I'd say the answer is, which is make sure you're spending time with people who have different skills, different backgrounds, different perspectives. Because as I write in the book, it can broaden your perspective and it can cover your blind spots. Because other people who are different than you are see a different reality than you do, right? Even if we're unaware. So, as we move through life, whether young, older, whatever, that's really the key. To me, people who bring different experiences and backgrounds can teach us a lot, whether it's a formal mentoring thing or not. And that's what I try to turn to.
I'd like to add to that a little bit too. I just had a senior at a university just reach out to me and say, hey, can you help me figure out how to go to market with this idea I have? And I would say put yourself back in being a college student or a young person that has no fear of just reaching out with a question and just go ask someone to teach you something. And I think if you do that, most people are willing to help. So it's almost like you have to go back to that early mindset of when you were fearless, more fearless than you may be now, and just asking for help.
So Marla, I think that's so important, and I've often said, and this goes back to start right where you are, and that idea of can you do one thing today or this week, right? Sometimes that's writing an email or making a call or visiting somebody or whatever. And it's very easy to get caught up in this idea that, they're going to say no, right?
Yeah.
My experience sounds like your experience. I mean, the vast, vast majority of time you ask someone for advice or some help, I've seen people say yes.
Yeah.
Different than asking them to write a check, okay?
Right. That takes a little more time.
But no, I totally agree with you. And I think that fearless ask, Steve Jobs, and I played the clip for my students before, talks about when he was 12 years old and he needed a part, and he called up Bill Hewlett at Hewlett-Packard, right? 12 years old. And he has a bit about make the fearless ask, and I think that's part of it.
And if they don't get back to you the first time, do it again.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, please.
Well, actually, the money question was actually the one I wanted to come to. So I've spent my whole career working in global health and development. Your project on the Ebola suit, which I know well. Nat Geo's going to have a documentary later this month, or not a film later this month.
On Ebola. Thank you. I should have said that. We have a series coming out on the Ebola, the first kind of the history of the Ebola.
Which is terrific because we need much more public education and incitement and engagement on this issue because the world panics when something happens and then forgets about it, and we don't make the long-term systemic investments in preparedness. So that's my passion project. But where I've stumbled is sort of on the ask for money. And there's a broader issue here that I think a lot of us, who have a good idea or feel like we know what needs to be done and we've analyzed the issue. It's like, how do you go from there to actually making the ask and connecting with the people who either, the people with money either already have their frame for what they're going to invest in, or they're sort of inaccessible and they haven't thought about the issue. So any thoughts or advice, not necessarily just about this issue, which I'd love to talk about, but more broadly, how you transcend and be fearless on making that ask, and also finding that, I want to find that next generation of investors and philanthropists who will engage on this issue. So also any thoughts about that and how you engage others in some of these more systemic global issues to get involved.
Sure. So Steve and I, made a commitment to give away the majority of our wealth before the Giving Pledge, and then when the Giving Pledge, we signed on to that as well. And the reason I point that out is, about half of our giving has gone through the Case Foundation, and the other half is just personally. So at the Case Foundation, we're very intentional in what we give to, and you can find it, and we don't accept unsolicited grant proposals. We've never given to the arts through the Case Foundation. You wouldn't believe how many people write us and say, will you support something in the arts? And it's like, did you not even look at who we are and what we are? So I would say on the money thing, it's critical to do your homework and to have what I call target marketing. You should know before you go into an environment whether this is something the person you're asking for resources from has demonstrated an interest in or a passion. And you don't always have to have that, but you're going to strike out a lot more if you go to someone where your idea, it's not on their radar screen. So that's really homework. And then more broadly, what I would say is, and I wrote a piece a few years ago called The ABCs for Women, and I recommend that we have a personal board. And the personal board really is people, if you think about them almost officially as your board of advisors, that will enable you then, if you're thinking through where should I go, if you're having a crisis of confidence, they can remind you of your strengths, they can build you up. Sometimes you can rehearse or have them look at the email you're going to send or whatever. And I think we want to do that for each other. I don't know, Marla, have you used
Yeah, I have a set of friends that I rely on, that I go to when I have a question. Some of them are always available. I can text at 10 o'clock at night and they'll respond. But
Right.
you need sounding boards, and people have different backgrounds. One, is a friend from 20 years ago that just knows me so well, and some are recent friends that have been investors that have a different lens. So absolutely having people that you trust and can give you advice is critical. So,
Right.
but I never thought about it as a personal board. So now I'm going to think about it in a new context.
And remember what I said about if you have, more perspectives coming at an issue, you'll see more things will come to light,
Yeah.
and then you'll also maybe keep yourself from tripping up because they can see maybe some risk there that you don't see or whatever. So that's what I think.
I think we have time for one more question. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Amy. I started my own company last year, so it's just reached a year old in April.
Good
But
for you.
Thank you. But I'm also working a full-time job, so altogether, if I haven't added my hours, I'm pretty sure I'm doing 80, 90 hours a week on work. So this kind of goes along the question about doing too much. Do you have any tips on burnout or
I do.
reducing burnout? and
Particularly
also
for
work life?
entrepreneurs. There's actually a little bit of a mental health crisis amongst entrepreneurs because it can feel very isolating because I should probably just shut up and let Marla talk. But you probably know as a leader, when you have certain challenges or stressors, you don't necessarily feel like you can share some of them,
That's
right?
right.
It's an isolating thing. So going back to that board of advisors, I would really make sure that if you're really taking on all of that, that you have outlets where, you can kind of vent and be supported. And because yes, burnout is a really big thing for entrepreneurs. Isolation is a really big thing for entrepreneurs. But it goes back to your question about what's too much. I have a super bias, and I'm putting it out there that it's a bias. My view is 10% of the people do most everything in the world. So what you have is people who, and that's probably wrong, I don't know what the number is, but it's a small number. And what I see is people who are doing everything and too many people who haven't jumped in yet. I'd love to see that change. But for you, I would say just make sure you have outlets.
Jean, you are so wise. I have learned so much today.
That makes me feel really old, okay?
No, wisdom can be at any age. But I highly recommend the book. Jean is going to sign it. And I think what you'll find is not only sort of, the big ideas, but these incredibly inspirational stories, and also a window onto Jean's tremendous journey, and this information about how she's gotten to be the leader that she is today. So thank you so much for being here with us today and for being so inspirational for all of us.
Thank you, Marla, and thank you all for coming out today. It's great to be with you.